Good evening and welcome to the Library of Congress. My name is Adrienne Cannon. I am the Afro-American History and Culture Specialist in the Manuscript Division. Tonight's special event, celebrating the NAACP records at the Library of Congress, features a presentation by Gloria J. Brown Marshall, author of The Voting Rights War, the NAACP, and the Ongoing Struggle for Justice, accompanied by a related display of NAACP items from the recently processed Part 10 of the NAACP records in the Manuscript Division. I want to thank Elizabeth Schreier-Byers and Jamal Gordon for their help with organizing the event. I also want to thank the management of the Manuscript Division and Senior Archive Specialist Michael Folkorts and Nate Treble, who led a team of 18 staff processing Part 10 of the NAACP records, which became available for research use in November 2023. I hope you all had a chance to see the wonderful display that Nate and Mike curated in the adjacent room. Finally, I want to thank the NAACP for its stalwart support of researchers over the years and for entrusting the Library of Congress with the stewardship of the organization's records. The Library of Congress acquired the NAACP records as a gift from the association in 1964 with the help of attorney Morris L. Ernst, a founder of the American Civil Liberties Union and friend of Arthur Spingarn, the NAACP's counsel and president. The first boxes of non-current records arrived in November 1964. The library continues to receive new additions to the collection incrementally. The NAACP records now consist of approximately 4 million items dating from 1842 to 2019. The records encompass a wide variety of materials, including manuscripts, photographs, prints, pamphlets, maps, broadsides, sound recordings, and films. Every phase of the NAACP's many activities can be found in this rich and diverse collection. Part 10 of the NAACP record spans the years 1911 to 2019, with the bulk of the material dating from 1960 to 2010. It was derived from 20 accessions received by the library starting in the 1990s. It focuses on activities at the branch level, especially in Mississippi and other southern states from NAACP Region 5, primarily from 1963 to 1978, and covering major civil rights events and issues, including the Jackson Movement and the death and legacy of Mississippi Field Director Medgar Wiley Evers. Other files from the 1970s and 1980s expand upon programs represented in earlier parts of the collection that address economic reciprocity for African Americans, health and wellness issues, education initiatives, and energy policy. Files from the 1990s document the renewed focus on voter empowerment, police brutality, and environmental justice. Part 10 added nearly 900,000 items. In more specific terms, 2,369 archival boxes to the processed NAACP records in the Manuscript Division and expanded the already voluminous online finding aid by 450 pages. The NAACP records rank annually among the most heavily used by researchers, and with this new infusion of source material, will likely keep the collection atop the rankings for years to come. I will now proceed to introduce successively the Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden, Mr. Leon W. Russell, Chair of the NAACP National Board of Directors, who will deliver remarks. I will then introduce Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall, who will deliver her presentation. Carla Hayden was sworn in as the 14th Librarian of Congress on September the 14th, 2016. Dr. Hayden, the first woman and the first African American to lead the National Library, was nominated to the position by President Barack Obama on February the 24th, 2016. And her nomination was confirmed by the U.S. Senate later that year on July 13th. Her vision for America's National Library, collecting all Americans to the Library of Congress, has redefined and modernized the library's mission to engage, inspire, and inform Congress and the American people with a universal and enduring source of knowledge and creativity. During her tenure, Dr. Hayden has prioritized efforts to make the libraries and its unparalleled collections more accessible to the public. Through her social media presence, events, and activities, she has introduced new audiences to the many library treasures, from the Frederick Douglass Papers to the contents of Abraham Lincoln's pockets on the night of his assassination, to James Madison's crystal flute, made famous by Lizzo. By investing in information technology infrastructure and digital efforts, she has enabled the American people to explore, discover, and engage with this treasure trove of America's stories maintained by the Library of Congress, even if they never visit the library buildings in and around Washington, D.C. With support of a $15 million grant from the Mellon Foundation in 2021, Dr. Hayden launched the Of the People initiative, which is creating new opportunities for more Americans, especially Black, Indigenous, Hispanic or Latino, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, and other communities of color underrepresented in the library's collections, to engage with the library and add their perspectives to the library's collections. The initiative has 3 programs that invest in community-based documentarians, fund paid internships and fellowships to engage the next generation of diverse librarians, archivists, and knowledge workers, and invite underserved communities and institutions to create digital engagements with library collections. Prior to her current role, Dr. Hayden was the CEO of the Enid Pratt Free Library in Baltimore, Maryland since 1993. She was the Deputy Commissioner and Chief Librarian of the Chicago Public Library from 1991 to 1993, and Assistant Professor of Library and Information Science at the University of Pittsburgh from 1987 to 1991, and Library Services Coordinator for the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago from 1982 to 1987. She began her career with the Chicago Public Library as a Young Adult Services Coordinator from 1979 to 1982, and as a Library Associate and Children's Librarian from 1973 to 1979. Dr. Hayden was president of the American Library Association from 2003 to 2004. In 1995, she was the first African American to receive the Library's Journal Librarian of the Year Award in recognition for her outreach services at the Pratt Library, which included an after-school center for Baltimore teens offering homework assistance and college and career counseling. Dr. Hayden received a BA from Roosevelt University and an MA and PhD from the Graduate School of the University of Chicago. Among her numerous civic and professional memberships and awards, Dr. Hayden is an elected member of the American Philosophical Society and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. And it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce the 14th Librarian of Congress, Dr. Carla Hayden.
Wow. Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you so much. That was really something, and when you hear that, as you know, you get older as you go along, but also that's the type of introduction that you would want your mother to hear. So thank you, and welcome all of you to the Library of Congress. We're honored to have all of you here with us tonight to celebrate the NAACP records, and a more appropriate setting could not be found. The Library of Congress is the first national cultural institution in America and the chief repository for the nation's creativity and history. And it has gathered for many years materials that tell the story of women and men of African descent as part of the library's commitment to preserving the entire scope of American history. You may know that the Library of Congress is generally regarded as one of the leading centers for the study of African American experience from the colonial period to the present. And I must say, and Adrienne, I think, and Janice Ruth from Manuscripts would also agree, that few public institutions can approach the scale and the depth of the library's collections. As Adrienne said, in every format, from books, manuscripts, maps, newspapers, prints, music, photographs, films, and sound recordings. These comprehensive collections include the chronicle of the 20th century civil rights movement, and the cornerstone of the library's resources for the study of the civil rights movement is the NAACP collection. As Adrienne said, it ranks annually among the most heavily used by researchers in all of the collections at the Library of Congress. That includes the papers of 23 presidents, 38 Supreme Court justices, and notable people throughout history. So the NAACP records were among the first collections identified by the library in a multi-year funding request to Congress to support the essential work to make these unprocessed special format materials available to the public. Dedicated funding, and some also from the Ford Foundation, allowed the library to hire additional archival staff to tackle, and it says here tackle, because when Adrienne was describing all of those boxes, imagine this room filled with boxes, to really make sure that the records were available. So I want to add my personal congratulations and thanks to the Manuscript Division for organizing and making available another 900,000 records of the NAACP. I think that deserves a hand. That was quite a bit of processing. And we also maintain original records of other organizations that led the fight for civil liberties, such as the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, the National Urban League, the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. And these organizational records are enhanced by the personal papers of numerous African American leaders and activists throughout history, including Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, Carter G. Woodson, who is a relative of Adrienne Cannon, Mary Church Terrell, Nannie Helen Burroughs, Roy Wilkins, Thurgood Marshall, Arthur Springarn, Robert L. Carter, A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, James Foreman, and Rosa Parks. And over the years, the Library of Congress has showcased in many ways the rich African American collections through publications such as the African American Mosaic Resource Guide and popular exhibits like the African American Odyssey and others on Rosa Parks and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Now, these programs and the acquisitions they promoted would not have been possible without the generosity of the Congress of the United States. That's been called the greatest patron of a library in the history of the world. For they have enabled us to build and sustain the world's most comprehensive collection of knowledge and history, of which our African American material is a vital and, we're very proud to say, a growing part, as the newly processed NAACP records illustrate. So it's an honor to have you here to celebrate, and we thank you for being here. And Adrian, I'm turning it back to you.
Chairman of the National Board of Directors, Mr. Leon W. Russell. Leon W. Russell was elected chairman of the National Board of Directors of the NAACP at its annual Board of Directors meeting in New York on February the 18th, 2017. Mr. Russell has served as a member of the NAACP National Board of Directors since 1990. Mr. Russell retired in January 2012 after serving as the director of the Office of Human Rights for Pinellas County Government, Clearwater, Florida, since January 1977. In this position, Mr. Russell was responsible for implementing the county's affirmative action and human rights ordinances, which provide for the development of a racially and sexually diverse workforce reflecting the general makeup of the local civilian labor force and the implementation of the county's equal employment opportunity programs. Programs involved in the implementation of this ordinance cover employees in all of the departments under the county administrator and the 5 constitutional officer. The Pinellas County Human Rights Ordinance provides protection for illegal discrimination in housing, employment, public accommodations for the county's 923,000 residents. This ordinance has been deemed substantially equivalent to Title VIII of the 1968 Federal Fair Housing Act and Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Over 500 formal complaints of discrimination are filed under this ordinance annually. In September 2007, Mr. Russell was elected president of the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies, IAOHRA, during its annual meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. The IAOHRA membership is agency-based and consists of statutory human and civil rights agencies throughout the United States and Canada, as well as representation from other nations. These agencies enforce state and local civil rights laws and are actively engaged in reducing and resolving intergroup tension and promoting intergroup relations. Mr. Russell concluded his second term as IAOHRA president at the conclusion of the organization's annual conference in Austin, Texas in September 2011. Additionally, Mr. Russell served as the president of the Florida State Conference of Branches of the NAACP from January 1996 until January 2000, after serving for 15 years as the first vice president. He has served as Assistant Secretary Chair of the Convention Planning Committee and Vice Chairman of the NAACP National Board of Directors. Mr. Russell has served as a member of such organizations as the International City Management Association, National Forum of Black Public Administrators, Board of Directors of the Children's Campaign of Florida, Blueprint Commission on Juvenile Justice with responsibility for recommending reforms to improve the juvenile justice system in the state of Florida, past board member of the Pinellas Opportunity Council, and past president and board member of the National Association of Human Rights Workers. Currently, he serves as the chairman of the American Children's Campaign, formerly the Children's Campaign of Florida. Mr. Russell also served as the chairman of the Floridians Representing Equality Equity and Equality, FREE. FREE was established as a statewide coalition to oppose the Florida Civil Rights Initiative and anti-affirmative action proposal authored by the Ward Connerly. Ultimately, the initiative failed to get on the Florida ballot because of the strong legal challenge spearheaded by FREE. Mr. Russell has received numerous civic awards and citations. He was born and grew up in Pulaski, Virginia, where he attended segregated Chaffee Elementary School, Christiansburg Institute, and graduated from Pulaski High School in 1968. He is a graduate of Eastern Tennessee State University in Johnson City, Tennessee, with a BS degree in political science. Please join me in welcoming Chairman of the Board of the NAACP, Leon W. Russell.
Thank you, Adrian, for that overly long introduction. Good evening, and thank you all for coming to this program this evening. This is extremely important because, first of all, what you'll hear from our brilliant Gloria Brown Marshall when she talks about the voting rights war and what that really meant for us. But for me as chairman of the National Board of Directors of the NAACP, this is an opportunity to thank the Library of Congress for its partnership since 1964. And obviously, we are a 115-year-old organization. So it doesn't surprise me that we have the largest collection at the Library of Congress. What does often surprise me is the fact that I hear so many people talking about the fact that they've come to the manuscript division to do research and that they have used the papers of the association so many times. And that, to me, is part of the most important thing that can happen for the association, because we're very bad at telling our own story. Very bad at telling our own story. That 115-year history, that really is the civil rights history of this country. I'm somewhat, and I tend to challenge historians who want to say that there is a modern civil rights movement. I don't know what that means when it's obvious to me that since we got off the first boat, that we've been fighting for freedom. And so the civil rights movement has been a 400-year movement, and certainly a 246-year movement when we think about the history of the nation. And so I'm very pleased that the Library of Congress feels that it can honor us, quite frankly, by doing the display, by making sure that people have access to the over 4 million documents that make up the NAACP collection. And so I'm very pleased about that. Before I go any further, I want to raise two names. First, I want to introduce India Artis, who is the current archivist of the NAACP. She works very closely with the staff of the Library of Congress in making sure that all of the boxes that are recent get here. She's the person, the conduit between a lot of people who want to know things and the Library of Congress, where she tells them, if you want to know, go there. But I also want to raise another name, and that's the name of Mildred Bond Roxborough. Mildred basically has been the mother of our association with the Library of Congress. And let me just give you a little history. Mildred Bond Roxborough came to work for the NAACP in 1954. We ain't let her go yet. She is 97 years old, and she's still an employee of the NAACP. Now, she has retired 5 times, but we won't let her go. But Mildred, in any number of positions that she's held with the association, including in the branch and field department, which is where the majority of the documents, I think, probably come from with respect to the things that are here at the library. Mildred was part of that organization. She was our convention planner. She was our development director, but mostly she was the archive. She remains the archive of the association. When India needs to know something, she has a hotline to Mildred, and they will get it done. So I wanted to raise those 2 names. Somebody walked in the room that I'm going to introduce also. Derek Lewis, stand up, Derek. If you look at the display, which I guess is, what are you calling it now, Section 10? Or Part 10. Part 10. Talks about really that period of what I consider the heat of the 60s, the 50s, the 70s. And one of the things that we were talking about when we were looking at that display was the fact that it was young people who were the heart of the movement. It was the young people who faced the dogs, who faced the water hoses, who really stood out. Derek Lewis is the ascending, and I'm making an announcement I'm not supposed to make, but I'm going to make it, is the ascending director of the Youth and College Division of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And so we're really thrilled that we continue to be on the forefront with our young people, that they continue to churn and make things happen. And so we're really thrilled about that. The collection that is used here really is the basis for a lot of what people write about black folks, a lot of the truth that folks write about black folks in this country. The ability to come to the Library of Congress, go through the manuscripts that are stored here, that are collected and cataloged here, give people a snapshot of what life in the United States for black folks really is about. And so we at the association are really very, very proud of our association with the Library of Congress. We look forward to adding more boxes. Part 10, Part 11, Part 12, Part 13 of the collection. We look forward to being able to share the work that goes on throughout this country in communities that really make up the NAACP, and because they make up the NAACP, they are the story of black folks in America. In closing, I just a personal vignette. Somebody just asked me a moment ago if I had family connections that caused me to be engaged and involved with the NAACP. And up until about 3.5 years ago, I did not know all of my own family history. We're about a week away from May 17th, and everybody knows Brown versus the Board of Education. But I don't think people think about what led to Brown. And what led to Brown was a legal attack in a lot of areas, quite frankly. One of the most important of those being equalization of teacher pay and the fight to make, remember Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal? To make separate equal. That was a legal fight. The lawyers who would eventually argue the Brown case began arguing for equalization, suing for equalization. And I had no clue. I had no clue that my maternal grandfather had been a plaintiff in 1947 in an equalization lawsuit in Pulaski County, Virginia. Lawyers were Oliver Hill and Spotswood Robinson. I didn't have a clue that that was the case until 3 years ago when I was asked to join some of my friends in working to reinvigorate our long-closed, segregated black elementary school, Calfee Elementary in Pulaski, to make it a community center and a community cultural center. And all of that history came tumbling out. And we like to think that if some folks down in Farmville hadn't raised a little cane, that Pulaski would have been the Virginia case in Brown. But it wasn't. We missed out. It's a history. We never know what we don't know. And so being able to come to the Library of Congress, being able to go through the records, being able to have people do research and do projects and learn about what our history is can teach us a lot about who we are and why we are. And so I want to thank the library, Dr. Hayden, Adrian, all of the staff here at the library for what you do in raising up and allowing people to see our 115-year history from the National Association. I look forward to hearing some of that great research from Dr. Brown Marshall. So, thank you.
Gloria J. Brown Marshall is a professor of constitutional law and Africana studies at the John Jay College, City University, New York. Her books include The Voting Rights War, the NAACP, and the Ongoing Struggle for Justice. She Took Justice, The Black Woman, Law and Power, and Race, Law, and American Society, 1607 to the present. Prior to becoming a tenured full professor of constitutional law at John Jay College, she taught in the Africana Studies program at Vassar College, litigated cases for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Community Legal Services, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund Incorporated, and was a law clerk in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania and the Court of Common Pleas in Philadelphia. Gloria Brown Marshall is an interdisciplinary writer with essays in the Milwaukee Courier, Time.com, CNN.com, NBC.com, and in several journals. As a playwright and producer, Professor Brown Marshall has brought stories of resilience and resistance to the forefront through the production of 7 plays, including Shot, Caught a Soul, published by TRW, My Juilliard, Killing Me Softly, Waverly Place, and Dreams of Emmett Till, which takes the murder of Emmett Till into the 21st century. She attended the Sarah Lawrence MFA program. Her work in progress is a play entitled Class that asks, "Who owns American history?" She recently completed a documentary film titled Before 1619, based on the travels to Angola, and forthcoming nonfiction book entitled A Protest History of the United States. Professor Brown Marshall received an Emmy Award as a writer and host of Your Democracy, an animated video series that explores the pillars of the United States Constitution. She is a recipient of a Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics Fellowship, Pulitzer Center Grant, Wiley College Woman of Excellence Award, NAACP Service Award, Emerging Screenwriter Award, American Film Award, among many film festival awards, and a Frederick Lewis Allen Fellowship. She is founder director of the Law and Policy Group Incorporated, a nonprofit organization that produces the biennial report on the status of Black women and girls, the only ongoing national report on the state of Black females in America. She has provided legal commentary for CNN, MSNBC, CNN International, France 24, BBC, and dozens of media outlets around the United States. Professor Brown Marshall is a member of the National Press Club, National Association of Black Journalists, NAACP, Organization of American Historians, PEN International, the Authors Guild, Center for Fiction, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority, National Association of Black Attorneys, Mystery Writers of America, and the American Bar Association. Gloria Brown Marshall was invited by entities such as the International Monetary Fund, U.S. Coast Guard, Howard University Law School, the National Archives, as well as colleges, bar associations, theaters, and civic organizations nationally and internationally to speak on issues of legal history, constitutional law, gender equality, literature and law, and racial justice. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, our principal speaker for this evening, Professor Gloria J. Brown Marshall.
This is such an high honor. I'm going to take a moment to just get my nerves together because I do not want to disappoint my ancestors. And one of the things that I find is so fascinating about this organization, this entity, our government, is that the possibility is there for so much. I thank you, the Honorable Carla Hayden. I thank you, please, Mr. Russell, for your remarks, for being here, for taking your time. But I also want to thank the dignitaries of elected officials, as well as those people who are the activists in the community, because they too are giving so much to make this country great. I want to thank everyone who is working to make our democracy strong, and that takes everyone's effort. Thank you, Adrienne Cannon, for inviting me. There are so many writers out there who would love to be in my place right now, and that's too bad because I'm here. When you think about how many boxes of information, letters, the NAACP is bestowing upon the world, you think about all the different researchers who have come to the NAACP to better understand this country. It's just an amazing sense of pride. And the NAACP gives me, in my research, a deeper sense of cultural pride. I am a very proud African American. And once you begin to research the history of our country, and you begin to research the history of the road we've traveled, you too would better understand, if you don't already, why one would be a proud African American. It's just the sense of having to fight the fight of 2 steps forward and 1 long step back over 400 years. And the power that the African American experience, as evidenced through the documents of the NAACP, provide for us to understand why people will continue to push us backwards. Because we do have political power, and we've had this power for well over 400 years. And this power and cultural pride coming together is a force that has allowed us to be in this room today. Our political progress is recorded in those documents. And if I had a real social life, I would be able to tell you so much more about how the world thinks about the NAACP documents. But I am one of those people who actually believes the thrill of life, for me, is going to the archives. It's going to the library. To going through those documents for me, to put my hands, to lay my hands on the letters of those who wrote to the NAACP in the midst of rural communities asking for the help of this organization. Those who became members knowing that their membership could mean that their farms would be burned or they would lose all employment, and yet they became members anyway. That's the source of power and pride I see when I go through those documents. And it's been 2 steps forward and 1 step, and many times 1 very long step back. But that did not stop us. And that's where the pride comes in as well. Knowing the obstacles that are there and continuing to fight anyway. That is what the NAACP represents to me. When I was in high school and middle school, I was bused across town. I was one of those people. And so when I see the exhibit and it looks at the busing of students, I remember being bused. I remember standing on those street corners when it was before the sunrise, waiting for the school bus to come. I remember wanting to do more extracurricular activities after school, but not being able to because I had to get back on the bus to go across town. I remember what happened to students in other parts of the country. I remember being the only one, and this assumption of deficit, the assumption of not being smart enough, of not being good enough. But I also remember being a class officer. I remember lettering in track. I remember the trophies I won in speech and debate. And what it did was show me when I competed that I won most of the time. And it made me realize with a confidence to stand before you now that Brown versus Board of Education and these other cases that were brought, and the jury is still out for whether or not what was gained was enough for what little children like myself at that time lost. We don't know. But in the end, we had to break the cycle of segregation. When I was writing the book I'm working on now, A History of Protest, I found out that my relative was a civil rights attorney in Kansas who brought one of the initial cases, but he didn't live long enough to see the Brown versus Board of Education case. And that's what we've all been doing. I ran track. When you place the baton in the hand of the person who's running after you, those young people then take off and run as fast as they can in their time. When I read these documents, I see the people who ran their race and handed the baton over to the next generation, generation after generation after generation. When I write as an activist, as a civil rights attorney, when I'm a playwright, my philosophy is that of Sankofa. We must understand our past to better understand our present, to build a better future. So let me take a moment, if you don't mind, to not start our history in the past of this country's oppression, but as African Americans, to start it in Africa. And the reason why I think it's important to start it in Africa, just one individual person, if you could take this person home with you, I'd appreciate it. And that's Queen Nzinga. And Queen Nzinga of what was then Ndongo and Matamba was a warrior queen born in 1583. She died in 1663. She negotiated a peace treaty with the Portuguese who had invaded her country in 1622. When we had our 400th commemoration, it was those 20 and odd Africans who had arrived in 1619 into Virginia. From whence did they come? Angola. Angola. So when we've had these debates around political power and the African American experience, it's with this sense that we don't understand how government works. But she was queen, therefore there was a government. Europe did not have to give Africa the sense of government. Her father was king. He was someone she watched as he had to oversee and make decisions, as any king would, a king in Europe would. We need to understand that we did not have to have the destruction of Africa to give us civilization. We had government, we had religion, we had a culture, we had what was needed for us to grow from there. So some people still believe that the best thing happened was that slave ship. I'm not one of those people, and I'd like to discuss it with the folks who think that that was a good thing. Maybe we can have a conversation, because we need to understand that government, what we see as our role in government, is something that we have known for thousands of years. Maybe it wasn't based on the way government was set up in many European places, but we had our sense of government. I say this and I spend the time on it because this idea that we had to be taught what government meant and we weren't ready for it yet. We weren't ready to have the vote. We needed to learn more, our political responsibility. And yes, all of us make mistakes politically. All of us make decisions about how we want to use our vote. But the idea that we had no sense of government was untrue historically. And I just want to set that record straight first. When those 20 and odd Africans arrived into the colony, we know of Mary and Anthony Johnson, who had land of their own. That colony was formed in 1607. Only those with land could vote. When we talk about the NAACP and the obstacles it faced, it's now, at that time, when it was formed, facing obstacles that went back hundreds of years. Prejudices, laws that were in place to undermine the political process of people of African descent. This whole wall of circumstances were put in play. So let me tell you a little bit more. Mary and Anthony Johnson had land of their own. They had servants, European and African servants of their own in the 1600s. And then the laws were changed and forced them out of the colony. We need to understand that law has played this role. Law and violence have played the role to undermine our political progress. When we're in a situation in which we have the position of political power, it's undermined and the backlash is based solely on our progress. When we look at our progress, wait for the backlash. It has happened historically. And so when we go through and we look at our perseverance, we say the rules have been set out, we're playing by those rules, and as soon as we get successfully there, the rules change. The backlash comes, of law and violence. That has been the 2 steps forward and the long 1 step back. The NAACP records show us. What is it that we had to do? Well, Wentworth Cheswell was elected constable in Newmarket, New Hampshire. We would say he's the first Black elected official. When was this? 1789. Chattel slavery was already in place across the country. Yet, we persevered. We, at that time, still sought out political power. European immigrants could not vote if they did not have land, but in order to maintain white political power, those laws were changed to allow those European immigrants, landless immigrants, to then vote. But Africans in America could not vote. The laws were made different, even during the 1700s and 1800s, laying the foundation for those differing laws going into the future. But Sankofa tells us, continue to study that past, not from the standpoint of all the obstacles we had, but here's where I see our agency. We had those obstacles, and then we said, we're going to go forward anyway. That's why you have a Sojourner Truth. That's why you have a Harriet Tubman. That's why you have a Frederick Douglass, who said the ballot or the bullet. Yes, he said that before Malcolm X. The ballot or the bullet was from Frederick Douglass. Why? Because over 100,000 Black people fought to make this country free in the Civil War. If you have a chance, please go to the African American Civil War Museum. Frank Smith is right here in the audience. It is a wonderful exhibit, and it will show you that without those Black soldiers fighting, the North would have lost. We weren't giving our freedom. We earned our freedom. We earned it, and we earned with it the ballot. And with that ballot came the backlash. The backlash of the Ku Klux Klan, the John Birch Society, and other entities that did not want to see the Black power and the Black position in politics. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except as punishment for a crime. The 14th Amendment gave citizenship at birth, due process, equal protection, privileges, and immunities. The 15th Amendment gave the Black man the right to vote, and vote he did. No women could vote at that time, but the Black man and the white man had a right to vote. The women had met, remember, in Seneca Falls in 1848, demanding their right to vote as well, and they pushed for it. But those same white women did not want Black women included in the suffragist movement. Did that stop us? We're Black women. Of course it did not. We started our own organizations and continue to fight. And as Sojourner Truth said, Ain't I a Woman, in 1851 at their convention in Akron, Ohio, took the stage and said, Ain't I a woman? We have continued in our foundational ways to change this country whether or not it liked it, but needed it. That 15th Amendment gave us Hiram Revels, the first Black U.S. Senator. The first Black U.S. Senator was not Barack Obama. It was Hiram Revels in 1870. And from there, we had thousands of Black men in state, local, and federal offices. And then, of course, what happens? The Colfax Massacre in 1873 in Louisiana, Black men coming together, trying to figure out just how to use their political power. White men surround it. They surround the building and begin to shoot in it. We don't even know how many lives were lost. There were mass graves, they said, of hands and legs sticking out of the shallow graves that had been thrown together bodies to cover up the crime. The U.S. Supreme Court then says no in the Cruikshank case versus United States. We're not going to find a crime here. There were federal civil rights laws to protect the black vote. However, the U.S. Supreme Court said they weren't voting at the time, so therefore it wasn't a violation of the federal laws. These are the types of obstacles that met us at every turn, and yet we persevered. We pushed forward. We knew we had political power, and that's why you had the Mississippi Plan. Senator James Kimball Vardaman, who decided, and if you don't mind my reading, and I will not read the offensive parts to his statement. In my book, The Voting Rights War, James Kimball Vardaman, later governor of the state and a U.S. senator, removed all doubt about why the state had voted to add a literacy test and poll tax. Quote, "There is no use to equivocate or lie about the matter. Mississippi's constitutional convention was held for no other purpose than to eliminate the N-word from politics. Not the ignorant, but the N-word." Vardaman believed the cold-blooded murder of blacks to prevent them from progressing beyond menial labor was acceptable. He said, and I quote, "If it is necessary, every Negro in the state will be lynched. It will be done to maintain white supremacy." End quote. Let's not get it twisted in the old Latin phrase. That's from the very old Latin. I want us to understand what we were up against once black men gained the right to vote in 1870 with the 15th Amendment. And so we began to see the Mississippi Plan of 1890 leading into Plessy versus Ferguson that said that we'd be separate but equal, and separate was never equal. Was never equal. The end of Reconstruction came in 1877 and left us without any federal protection. My people in 1879 are known as part of the Exodusters. We left Kentucky and went to Kansas. That was a brave, bold thing for us to do. I know we've heard of the Great Migration of the 1900s, but there was a migration before that. In the 1870s, that was my family. And we tried as best we could to try to carve out a living there. The Midwest seemed to have hope for us. There were others who came up to the Midwest, but we hadn't had the real great migration yet. And then what happens? We have the Springfield riots. In the birthplace, home, they say, that's known for Abraham Lincoln. And as these rioters are lynching and burning down black homes and businesses, and they're screaming out, "Lincoln freed you, but we're going to show you your place." This is what we were experiencing. And it's in that bloodshed that we have the rise of the NAACP. Because there was a call that was made from white Northerners, Mary Ovington leading that charge, and many others who said, wait a minute, where are the abolitionists? Remember, it hasn't been this long since slavery ended. Where are the abolitionists? Why are we not protecting the African Americans? And so with that call, there was a meeting that was held, and that meeting was one to address the Springfield riots of August 14th, 1908. But on the other side, people of African descent weren't waiting for white people to save us. I mean, no offense, none whatsoever. But the spirit of Queen Nzinga has been in us all of this time. So therefore, W.B. Du Bois had already started the Niagara Movement. And as part of the Niagara Movement of 1905, we have the meeting of people who are one generation, and some not even one generation, out of slavery, who are meeting to decide their own futures, their own determination. And with that, an invitation goes out from the call of Mary Ovington, based on the Springfield riots. And the call is made to W.B. Du Bois because it's already shown his ability to lead and come together with a program that was essential to the self-determination of people of African descent. The Niagara Movement, and I quote, "The world spurns the coward who fears to try." Listen to that. Listen to that. Besides, there is no telling what can be done by thoughtful, intelligent cooperation. At least in such an organization, we can make the country know and realize that as men, we will not, without protestation or an effort to obtain our own, allow others to take what rightfully belongs to us. Sucky now. And there's a young part to this. They add to it, and I quote, "We want our college students to take a stand." This is in 1905. "We want our college students to take a stand for the principles set down in the objects of the Niagara Movement. We want you to do so because it will make you fearless men, useful to the race." This is what was going on in the early part of the 20th century. Develop and make yourselves strong for the leadership which will come to you. I want us to understand that when the NAACP was formed, most people say it was a majority white organization. Yes, it was. W.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells Barnett were the two African Americans who were part of that founding group. But when that invitation, the call, went out to meet on Lincoln's birthday, that call went out to 1,000 people. The activists of that time period, the leaders of that time period, less than 150 answered the call. So we need to understand it was difficult. It was also difficult for the Niagara Movement because those African Americans who met in Niagara side of, Canadian side of Niagara Falls, because that's where they could meet in an integrated fashion and have some form of self-determination and agency. That's why it was called the Niagara Movement, because they met on the Canadian side of Niagara Falls. They felt that an organization that was led by whites alone, for the most part, would not represent their interests in the same way. That's still a debate we have today, or we should be having. I want us to better understand as well that ACSO, which is part of the NAACP and part of the display we have here, the academic, the creative, the technological, the scientific Olympics for young people. That's the young group that is part of the NAACP. That was something, as I said before, the Niagara Movement was looking at too, generationally. When we hand off the baton, are we preparing our young people to take it? Or are we thinking, oh, you don't know your history well enough yet? There are some among us who say we don't tell our history to the young people enough, or how are they supposed to know their history well enough to take on that baton to make us feel comfortable? Dr. Henry Moskowitz, Mary White Ovington, Moorfield Story, who became president of the NAACP and brought some of the original cases. I started working on this book during the time period of President Barack Obama's second term, because I had a feeling, that sense of joy, and I was here in Washington, D.C., I was among the crowds, and it was cold outside. If those of you remember that, that was a very cold, cold day, and yet it was warm because we were together in this, and I said, oh my goodness, people are going to expect this for every election. And if they don't get it, they're not going to want to vote. That's what made me feel I needed to write something to remind us. And the NAACP documents, a celebration of these documents, because it reminds me of those who came before. And that's why I said this journey in particular, the journey of the NAACP, is America's journey, is our social justice journey, is our political journey. And so therefore, those documents would be the best way for me to highlight where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. That's why I wrote this book, because I had a feeling people are going to want that hallelujah moment for the next election, and when they don't get it, they're going to stay home. But I want us to also know, during these time periods in early American history, I don't think that the people, black men and then in 1920, black women, were voting for people who actually cared about them. I don't think they had the issues on the ballot that would have been in the best interest of the African American at the time. But they said, I need to have my right to vote anyway. It may not be the politician I want. It may not be the issue I want. Maybe I want to vote just to vote against it. But I want my right. We're not going to always have a sense of celebration with every election. They wanted that right because it came with citizenship. And they wanted to be full citizens and have full political participation. When we went through the documents, when when we went through the documents, it was with this sense of awe. How were they able to be in rural Texas and have the sheriff threaten them with lynching and still remain a member of the NAACP? How were they able to have the courage? I just, sometimes I look at this and I don't want to think that I'm without courage, but these are special people. Dear sir, the colored people in this part attempted to vote in the Democratic primary election, which was held on or about July 27th last. We were prohibited from having any part of this election, but not because we were not willing to take the Democratic oath, but on the grounds that we were Negro. We desire to test this matter to the limits of the courts and win what we go after. This was in 1918. I want us to understand, when we tell people who say they are not sure they want to vote, why? I'm not going to get what I want anyway. What difference does it make? Just as they probably in 1918 didn't have the politician on the ballot that was best representing their issue, they said, we showed up to vote, and they put their lives on the line to do so. Their lives on the line because in 1920, after black women gained the right to vote, the backlash was not just against black men, it was also against black women, because black women were being lynched too. Sir, while stopping in your beautiful little city this week, I was informed that you were of the habit of going out among the Negroes of Orlando and delivering lectures, explaining to them just how to become citizens and how to assert their rights. If you are familiar with days of Reconstruction that followed in the wake of the Civil War, you will recall that the scalawags of the North and the Republicans of the South proceeded very much the same as you are proceeding, to instill into the Negro the idea of social equality. You will also remember that these things forced the loyal citizens of the South to organize clans of determined men who pledged themselves to maintain white supremacy and to safeguard our women and children. And now, if you are a scholar, you know that history repeats itself, and that he who resorts to your kind of game is handling edged tools. We shall always enjoy white supremacy, in caps, in this country, and he who interferes must face the consequences. Signed, the Grand Master of Florida, Cluck, Cluck. So even our white allies were at risk of death. It must be understood that the political power of the African American was such that there were the laws, the literacy tests, the poll taxes, and of course, if that didn't work, out and out violence. I want to give you two more quick points, and then I know we're going to open up for Q&A. Annie Harper in Virginia, Evelyn Butts, they brought their own challenges against the poll tax. The literacy test was challenged as well, and the literacy test was challenged in a way by Louise Lassiter, who, if you can imagine, to pay your poll tax, you had to go to the sheriff's office. What level of intimidation can you believe to have to pay the poll tax, which is then alerting the sheriff, I intend to vote, and that's why I'm paying this poll tax. So now the sheriff can then alert the Ku Kluxers, as this letter shows, to attack that person at night. There is no prosecutor who's prosecuting, no politician who's protecting, and no sheriff who's there. It's just those people who are members of the NAACP sending their letters in, asking to be part of legal cases, challenging poll taxes, challenging literacy tests. The poll tax was finally eliminated in 1964. It took an amendment to the U.S. Constitution. An amendment to the U.S. Constitution. I want us to think about the tent cities. And in my book, I have a picture of one of the tent cities. The tent cities, people living in tents. Why? Because they registered to vote. And they were driven out of town, driven from their homes and having to live in a tent in the elements. I want us to think about those who were imprisoned in 1972, who decided they would start an NAACP branch in prison. I want us to think about those things. Harry and Harriet Moore, blown up in their homes, NAACP activists, school teachers, and probably the sheriff did it, allegedly. The sheriff, who was known in that part of Florida to have killed others, allegedly. A bomb placed on Christmas Day under their home of Harry and Harriet Moore. And he died on the way to the hospital. She died a few days later, just because they were registering people to vote. NAACP martyrs. NAACP martyrs is what I call them. And the NAACP martyr of Vernon Dahmer, who knew that his life was in jeopardy. He knew that the time was getting near as an NAACP person who decided that he was help people to register to vote, and that during that time period he had been threatened so many times, but he knew it was coming close, but he didn't know that they would go to the point of throwing firebombs into his home. But he said with his dying breath, if you don't vote, you don't count. A voting rights martyr. In present day, we're dealing with Shelby County versus Holder, the case that gutted the Voting Rights Act, that President Lyndon Johnson knew was important to have pre-clearance to avoid legislation that could be put in place to undermine the right to vote, that proposed legislation had to be pre-cleared in certain jurisdictions. That was gutted from the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the one that so many lives were lost in order to pass. The 3 college students who were killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi, Medgar Evers, and on, church bombings, everything. And of course, the march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. All of that went into creating the foundation for the Voting Rights Act. And to this day, it languishes, this bill, to pass, to put those provisions back into the act, languishing in Congress. We need help. We need people to actually do the work to make sure it's passed. We're in the present. Today we have voter suppression, district packing cases, disappearing polling sites, chaos and attacks on the Capitol, book banning, racialized mass shootings. We have any number of oppressive tactics. And yet, we stand. We have cultural pride. We have political power. We have a past that goes well beyond even Queen Nzinga of perseverance. Our future is bold. Why? Because we have black astronauts, we have black prima ballerinas, we have black Olympians, we have black ambassadors, we have black head coaches, we have all of these black people who are in positions of power in corporations and governments and everything, and of course, we have a black vice president. So what should we expect? The backlash. Prepare for it, because historically it will come and we will survive it. We need to understand by the year 2045, this country is going to be majority people of color. Other people know this, and that's why you're seeing political apartheid strategies taking place. We need to ensure our young people are prepared to lead in 2045. We need to be prepared to understand that the role of a democracy can be a messy part of our lives, but it's a necessary part of our lives. As a matter of fact, Reverend C.T. Vivian, the late Reverend C.T. Vivian, who I see as a mentor who wrote the foreword for this book, said, "Our democracy is not the best, but it's the best we have." Therefore, when you go out and think about the NAACP, think about the road we've traveled, stony the road, and yet we stand tall. Cultural pride, power and faith, lift every vote. Thank you.